Good morning again, church. I just wanted to tell you on behalf of my husband, he'll be back next Sunday. I do want to tell you how much he loves you. He talks about you all the time. His plans are always about the church. And I want to ask you to pray for him. He has a great responsibility. And it's difficult sometimes to see him work a full-time job, work the full-time ministry. Never stop wavering his faith. And I just want to ask you to pray for him. I know these last couple of weeks have been really tough on him, just preparing for his work, the many visits that he has, the responsibilities. And here, he never stops loving God. And I can tell you, I don't know if he sleeps that much. He comes home late. He stays, Alan, you probably know, but he stays up late, up till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. And then he's up again at 4:30. So, and just preparing for your sermon, preparing for our sermon to be our shepherd. Amen? Thank you for praying for him. Thank you for being here. We love you.
Okay. Now I got the white and blue one now, Edgar. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Psalm 14:1 says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." Our Mr. Spock would say, just a second there, I forgot my keyboard, so I'm going to have to wing it here. This is, you would think I was prepared. I left my keyboard back there, so now I'm going to have to kind of make a fool out of myself here. All right. As Mr. Spock would say, atheism? Well, that's not logical, Captain. All right. Now, what in the world? This has just not been my morning, has it? There it is. I dragged the mouse over the thing. All right. I'm right at home up here, as you notice. All right. First thing is atheism contradicts itself. The American Atheist Society once defined atheism as follows. Atheism is the lack of belief in a deity, which implies that nothing exists but natural phenomenon, which is matter. Which, me, you, this church, whatever. That thought is a property or function of matter, and that death irreversibly and totally terminates individual organic units. When we die, we're nothing. This definition means there are no forces, phenomena, or entities which exist outside of or apart from physical nature, or which transcend nature or are supernatural, nor can there be. Humankind is on its own. That's the atheist definition of atheism. But can they prove it? No, they can't. This is an article of blind faith. I really do need to get my keyboard, I suppose. Okay. All right. These guys in this cartoon, they're having an argument. This one guy says, God doesn't exist. The other guy says, you haven't looked everywhere, have you? He says, no. Then you don't know for sure. Yes, I know for sure there are no deities. But you admit you haven't looked everywhere, so you don't know. I know for sure no deities. Your conclusion isn't at all scientific. But I will admit one thing. What's that? You have a lot of what you lack in evidence you make up for in faith. He doesn't have anything to say. He says, your faith is quite strong. In order to prove that there's no God, you'd have to know everything. You'd have to be able to look under every rock. And of course, nobody in this room, except for the Holy Spirit himself, knows everything. So, think about how you would go about trying to disprove that there is no God. They said that in that definition, they say that science is only methodical naturalism. In other words, the only things that exist are things you can see or touch or feel or smell or whatever. Okay? So their method immediately... Using their method, they cannot prove anything outside of the natural realm. It's like being locked in this church and trying to prove that there is no McDonald's down the street there. Okay? If you've been locked inside this church your whole life, you have no way to prove that there's nothing outside of this church. Right? And so these people have automatically limited themselves to what they can see and taste and detect. And so that's one fallacy with atheism. And they also said in that definition that thought is just a property of the chemicals in our brain. Well, there's a problem with that. If our minds are nothing but a bunch of chemicals, then how can we know what we're thinking is correct? We don't have anything outside of ourselves like a soul, like the Bible teaches, a soul or a spirit, to check what our mind says. So the atheist is therefore obliged to believe that rationality itself is the result of non-rational processes. And we know that there's not a shred of evidence for what they say, that there is no God, but they proclaim it with surprising certainty. There is no God. They have knowledge which, according to their own principles, is impossible to possess. Okay, another logical argument against atheism. St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a big thinker back in the Dark Ages, he had 5 ways to prove God through logic. I'm only going to cover 2 of them here for time, and some of them, they're really deep. It's too hard to explain. But this one here, this is what he calls the second way, the argument from efficient causes. It says, we perceive a series of causes of things in the world. Nothing exists prior to itself. I didn't exist before I was born. John didn't even exist before he was born. Yeah. This building did not exist before it was built, right? Pretty obvious, right? Okay. Therefore, nothing in the world of the things we perceive is the efficient cause of itself. I didn't cause myself. My parents caused me. My grandparents caused my parents, and so on down the line, right? But it's got to end somewhere. According to an atheist, it ends with the vacuum of space. Okay? So how did we get the beginning? Okay, we're going to go back to that here in a minute. Then his third way, the argument from possibility and necessity. We find in nature things which are possible to be and not to be. There's nothing in this world that we can see that's necessary for the existence of the world. He calls that contingent beings. He says, assume that every being is a contingent being. For each contingent being, there is a time that it doesn't exist. All of us, there was a time when we didn't exist. Therefore, it is impossible for these always to exist. Therefore, there could have been a time when no things existed. Therefore, at that time, there would have been nothing to bring the currently existing contingent beings into existence. Therefore, nothing would be in existence now. We have reached an absurd result from assuming that every being is a contingent being. Therefore, not every being is a contingent being. Therefore, some being exists of its own necessity and does not receive its existence from another being, but rather causes them. This all men speak of as God. So this was one of his 5 ways to prove that there's a God, using logic, using the formal logic that you might remember from high school math class. Then there's what they call the cosmological argument. And we've kind of covered that a little bit right now with Aquinas here. Everyone should be able to agree with the following proposition. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay? And that's a simplified version of the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that people can detect in this universe is contingent. Oh, we might have time to go back to them. That's Anselm. He lived about 1,000 in about the year 1000, and he come up with a logical proof. It's dead certain proof that there is a God, but it's really deep, and we may not have time to go back through it. So, but everything is contingent. The sun, the earth, and everything is contingent upon atoms. Everything in this room, the air you breathe, and everything is a collection of atoms. Atoms are protons, neutrons, and electrons. All right? Everybody knows that from school. Now, since I was in school, they've discovered that protons are actually made of subatomic particles, quarks and gluons and gluons and all kinds of things. make up the proton. And there is no reason to believe that any of these should have come into existence out of nowhere. Therefore, something necessary must have caused everything. A Christian might argue that God is the ultimate cause of the universe. Some have argued that the existence of the universe is just a brute fact. It just is. There was a guy, I don't remember his name now, it says, it was basically, what are the odds of an almighty, all-powerful being just happening? He is that he is, or just random energy, which is the universe is made of. I don't know whether he realized, if they knew back in his day, whether everything, matter is really just energy. But there's a problem with that. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is a study, and what happens is that things go from order to disorder. Like everybody's probably seen these end of the world movies where, the streets are abandoned and stuff like that, and weeds start growing up in the streets and stuff like that. Everything goes from order to disorder. And that is, this one guy wrote, what did he write? I know I put that quote here. Anyway, yeah, the second law of thermodynamics is immutable as can be. There's no way to prove that the second law of thermodynamics. So what would happen is if energy always existed, then as energy, even though you don't lose energy, it transforms into heat, which is useless for keeping atoms and protons and stuff together. Eventually, the universe would have died a heat death, and you might remember that from your high school science. Stephen Hawking, you might remember him. I got ahead of myself here. Okay, there's a nice little number right there. I've got 12 pages here. 10 to the 10 to the 123rd. There's no way that a person can comprehend how big of a number that is. The odds. Okay. 10 to the 399,970th power is the odds of one cell evolving from nothing. You can't comprehend how big of a number that is. Okay, there are only 10 to the 82nd powers atoms in the entire universe. Anything over 10 to the 50th power is considered absurd. It's impossible. Okay, so there are only 10 to the 82nd power atoms in the entire universe, and the odds of one cell evolving out of nothing are 10 to the 399,070th power. Okay, how many times will 10 to the 82nd go into 10 to the 970th power? Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of times. It didn't happen, y'all. It wasn't an accident. A trillion, y'all might remember when back here in February. Okay, 1 inch. 50,000 inches is about from here to Irvington Street. It's about 3/4 of a mile. 50,000 inches. That's a big number. I wish I had $50,000. A million inches is about from here to I-45 and FM 1960. I wish I had $1 million. A billion inches is from Houston to Perth, Australia, and halfway back. And some change. 1 trillion inches to the Earth, to the moon, and back 33 times with some change, or about halfway to the planet Mars. 1 trillion is an unfathomable number. It didn't happen. It was not an accident. Stephen Hawking wrote this. Stephen Hawking, y'all might remember him from, if you ever watched like science shows or anything on TV. He's a physicist, probably smarter than Einstein. This guy is incredible. He's got some sort of a physical disability, and he's been slowly kind of wasting away over the years. He wrote this: if the rate of the expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed on itself and before it ever reached its present size. On the other hand, if the expansion rate at 1 second had been larger by the same amount, the universe would have expanded so much it would be effectively empty right now. Okay? The mass of the universe is also as delicate as its velocity. This one guy calculated that the Creator had to aim for the mass of the universe had to be accurate to 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power, which is it's incalculable. It's a number that it's the number 1 followed by 10 to the 100. And he said that if we wrote a 0 on every proton in the entire universe, we'd still not have enough zeros to do that 10 to the 10th to the 123rd power. It didn't happen. It wasn't an accident. And this was the precision that was needed to set the universe on its course. Hawking also said if the electric charge of the electron had been only slightly different, stars would have been unable to burn hydrogen or helium, or they would have exploded. It seems clear there are relatively few ranges of values for the numbers for the constants that would allow the development of any form of intelligent life. Most sets of values would give rise to universes that, although they may be very beautiful, would contain no one able to wonder at that beauty. And the balance of this universe is incredible. Okay? Those people that say that the energy was just an accident, well, there had to be just exactly enough energy. And it had to have collapsed into the Big Bang and exploded at the exact right velocity to make this universe as it is now, make a habitable universe. It didn't happen. It was not an accident. That is called what they call the teleological argument. This one guy wrote that 10 to the 399,770th power. He says the odds of winning the lottery every day without missing a day for 10,000 years wouldn't even come close. There's no way that this was an accident. Even the energy in the universe. And then there's evolution. I love this little cartoon. Let's see if I can go back here. These snowmen talking to each other. It says, don't be absurd. Nobody made us. We evolved by chance from snowflakes. And we, as you know, are a lot more complicated than a snowman. There's no way that this was an accident. It said not even a child would believe that random chance piled snow on top of one another to form a snowman. Even after 13 billion years of permutations, they still wouldn't get it. And this one guy wrote, random shuttling of bricks will never build a castle or a Greek temple, no matter how long the available time. So evolution couldn't have possibly happened. It's absurd. Then there's the moral argument. Now there's these people who, if you look now, Ravi Zacharias and some, they use the moral argument. And basically what they say is that the very fact that we have morals proves that there's a God. And that's a whole study in itself. But basically, we know that there's objective evil. There were some people that they've kind of died away now. They call them the postmodernists, who believe that there is no absolute truth. There is no absolute evil. There's no absolute right or wrong. And then the events of September 11, 2001 forced them to realize, yes, there is absolute evil. I mean, in these people, certain situations, if their mom was murdered or something like that, we know that there's absolute evil. There is genuine evil that's evil in all circumstances. And the fact that we know that is proof that there's a God, because there's got to be something outside of ourselves to give us that discernment for that evil. And I don't know if I made a slide for this one. This is how Mr. Spock would have worded it. If a personal God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore a personal God exists. Objective moral values means that there's something right and wrong no matter what civilization you live at. Some countries and some civilizations have a different sense of right and wrong than we do, but there are absolutely things that span all cultures that are right and wrong. And the fact that we know this proves that there's a God. And finally, we got the biggest problem for atheists yet. That guy right there. Paul wrote, "But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned." And that explains why their minds have no slot to place Jesus in. Jesus claimed to be God. Some downright lie and say that he never existed or he is a myth. There is no scientific basis for that. Even the most hardcore, what they call liberal theologians, which has nothing to do with politics, admit that Jesus existed. Anybody who says he didn't exist is pulling something out of their hat. Because their mind, it forces them to come up with some other explanation. Like Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And then they picked up the rocks to stone him. That's in John 8, 53 through 59. They picked up the rocks to stone him because they knew exactly what Jesus was saying. He's saying, I am that I am. Just like when Moses introduced himself, when God introduced himself to Moses, he said, I am that I am, and the Jews heard him say that, and they picked up rocks. That was blasphemy to them. So he was claiming to be God publicly, openly. Then when what got him killed, when he was before the Sanhedrin, and he was accused, and they were questioning him and stuff like that. And then when the Sanhedrin guy asked him, he says, well, tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? And Jesus answered, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. That's in Matthew 26, 62 through 68. And the Sanhedrin guy tore his robes and says, we don't have no further need of this. This guy is blaspheming. Because he was claiming to be God. This is out of the book of Daniel. When he says, you'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven, he was claiming to be God to a Jew. If you don't have no background in the Old Testament, then you wouldn't really catch that. It's like, what was blasphemous about that? But that's what he was openly claiming to be God. And then after he was resurrected, or was it? When Philip says, show us the Father and it suffices us. And he says, he said, Philip, have I been with you so long that you don't know me? I and the Father are one. Okay, he again openly claimed to be God. And the atheists, they have to make up lies or make up stories. Like some say that he was a great prophet or a great man or whatever. But C.S. Lewis asked this question. He says, Jesus claimed to be God. Okay, was he lying? If he was lying, that automatically makes him not a good man. Right? Was he crazy? There's a lot of people in nut houses that think they're God. But he's not crazy. Because people that walked with him and talked with him at the time, they never thought he was crazy. He proved it. He walked on water. He raised people from the dead. He wasn't crazy. He even cast out demons. Or was he God himself? God has came among us, y'all. The problem with atheists is that, their minds don't have a slot. It's like Paul was saying, that the natural man has no understanding because they're spiritually discerned. But Adrian Rogers says that the reason that the atheists don't find God is the reason that a thief doesn't find the police, because they don't want to find him. Pascal, this Blaise Pascal from, I don't even remember when he lived, long time ago. He says, men despise religion because they're afraid it's true. That was part of me. I was afraid I was afraid to find God, because if there was a God and there's a holy God, I knew I was in big trouble. And I wasn't really kind of looking for the guy, but he kept chasing me down. And really, here's the ultimate reason why the people don't want to believe in God. They don't want you to believe in God. They don't want to see the Ten Commandments. This is out of 2 Corinthians 2, chapter 15 through 16. For we are unto God a sweet savor of Christ, in them that are saved, and in them that perish. To the one we are the savor of death unto death, and to the other the savor of life unto life. And who is sufficient for these things? So Paul was saying, whenever the unbeliever sees the Ten Commandments, it reminds them of their condition. And they know in their soul what their condition is, what their fate is if they don't find God. Because see, when Jesus says, he who believes in me shall not perish but have everlasting life, when he says believes, it's not in our sense like we believe the sun is 93 million miles away. That's not what he meant by the word believe. That Greek word in believe, Gary Habermas once defined it as is like saying I do. It's completely trusting and obeying and giving your life over to Jesus is what Jesus meant by when he says who believeth on me. Because English is hard to translate. And I think we're probably out of time. I don't think we're going to have time to go back to Anselm's argument. But basically, Jesus was God. This was not an accident. And like Mr. Spock says, atheism is not logical. It contradicts itself. There's no way to prove that there is no God. In fact, the evidence that there is a God is so overwhelming, it's incredible. The human eye, the fact that the eye can see and transmit to the brain what it sees. Now, if we evolved, you would think that the eye would just attach itself to the closest spot in the brain. But it doesn't. The optic nerve goes all the way back to the back of your brain. Your visual cortex is in the back of your brain. Now, that was just evolved by accident? I don't think so. God has come among us, y'all. He's for real. And if you haven't given your life over to God, if you haven't said I do to Jesus, come on up and get the prayer warriors. Prayer warriors, would you like to come up and pray for these people? Any kind of, whether you want to join the church or need prayer for any reason, or if you'd like to be saved, come on forward and